All right, let's jump right in. When you picture a provincial Russian town from about 100 years ago, you might imagine something, I don't know, quiet, maybe a little quaint, and probably pretty green. And you know what? For a while, the city of Cherepovets was exactly that. It even had a nickname, the Garden City.
I mean, just look at this postcard. This was the ideal, the image everyone had. One person who visited back then said the town was literally buried in the greenery of gardens and boulevards. It's this perfect vision, right? Of a city and nature living together in harmony.
And that's the central mystery we're going to unpack. Because this green paradise was hiding a huge contradiction. The very effort to create this garden city ran headfirst into forces that were causing serious environmental damage and social conflict. So how on earth did that happen?
To figure this out, we're going to approach this like historical detectives. First, we'll lay out the paradox. Then, and this is crucial, we'll look at the historian's toolkit, how we even know this stuff. After that, we'll trace the story from the Russian Empire into the Soviet era, see the huge conflict that erupted, and finally, figure out what this story from the past can teach us today.
Okay, first up, let's really get to the heart of this tension. On the one hand, you've got this incredible decades-long project to make the city beautiful and green. But on the other hand, you've got these massive social pressures just pulling it all apart at the seams. And here is the engine of all that pressure. Just look at these numbers. Between the late 1800s and the start of World War II, the city's population absolutely exploded. It grew by almost 10 times. This wasn't just a little growth, it was a total transformation, mostly driven by people moving in from the countryside. And they brought with them very, very different ideas about what a city and nature was for.
So before we get any deeper into the story, we got to ask a really important question. How do we actually know all this? For those of us who study this stuff, understanding the method is just as fascinating as the story itself.
The academic lens we're using here is called urban environmental history. Now, this isn't just about making a list of parks or counting trees. It's about seeing the city as this living, breathing ecosystem where society, culture, and the natural world are all tangled up, constantly pushing and pulling on each other.
And what's so cool is seeing the raw materials of the investigation. No one document tells you the whole story. You have to piece it together. You've got the official city plans and population data. But then you have to dig into old newspapers to see what people were actually arguing about. And then, if you're lucky, you find personal notes, like from this one very worried official we're about to meet, that tell you what was really happening on the ground. It's this piecing together that lets us build a clear picture of the past.
All right, let's rewind the clock. We're going back to the beginning of our story, to the late Russian Empire, where this dream of a garden city was really the brainchild of one single, very determined man. This is him. Ivan Andreevich Milutin, the mayor. He was the powerhouse behind all of the city's first greening projects. And his goal wasn't just to make the place look pretty, it was also about public health, sanitation, and creating organized public spaces for a growing town.
And this map from 1902, this is basically his master plan brought to life. You can see his key projects right here. See number 2? That's the Milyutinsky Garden, named after him. Right next to it, number 3, is the Salt Garden. And that long strip, number 5, that's the Grand Alexandrovsky Boulevard. These weren't just random parks. They were deliberate, carefully planned pieces of the city.
And here's the really brilliant part of his plan. The different gardens had totally different jobs. The Milyutinsky Garden was basically a science lab and a quiet zone, a botanical collection for peaceful walks. But the Salt Garden next door was the complete opposite. It was the social hub, built for entertainment, with a theater, movies, and concerts, a very neat, very organized imperial vision for how public life should work.
So you have this very ordered imperial vision. And then the revolution happens. And everything is about to change. The whole purpose of these green spaces gets turned completely on its head.
The first thing they did was symbolic, but it was a big deal. They merged the two separate gardens into one giant park, the Garden of Culture and Rest. Now, in the Soviet way of thinking, rest didn't mean just relaxing on a bench. Oh no, it meant organized, purposeful, mass cultural events. And to make that happen, they filled the park with all kinds of new stuff. That quiet botanical garden, suddenly it's got a carousel, a shooting gallery, a volleyball court, even a huge dance floor. The whole vibe just flipped from quiet reflection to loud, active group fun.
And boy, was it popular. On a normal summer weekend, you could get up to 4,000 people pouring into this park.
This wasn't a little neighborhood green space anymore. It was a massive entertainment hub, and that put a kind of stress on the park's environment that it was never, ever designed to handle.
And this is where it all comes to a head. The grand vision of a garden city, first the imperial one, then the Soviet one, crashes right into the messy reality of how thousands of new people actually used these spaces. This quote, from the personal notes of a local official named Mikhail Kalinin, it's just brutal. He's writing in 1936, and he's not pulling any punches. He says, "The city has more green space than anywhere else in the region, but its condition? It was a catastrophe." And Kalinin's notes give us the heartbreaking details. This wasn't just a bit of littering. People were cutting down new trees for firewood. They were letting their goats and cows graze on the boulevards. The beautiful lawns were trampled into solid dirt. Flowers were ripped out the same day they were planted. It's like the beautiful vision was being physically taken apart, piece by piece. So the big question is, why? Why was this happening? Well, the historian's analysis points to this profound cultural clash. The new city dwellers, who came mostly from villages, just didn't see the parks the same way the planners did. To them, a tree wasn't a piece of urban decor, it was potential firewood. A patch of grass wasn't a lawn to be admired, it was food for your goat. They were simply applying their rural logic to a city environment that wasn't built for it.
So, after all that, what's the big lesson from the troubled story of Cherepovets' green dream? Well, it offers this incredibly powerful and timeless takeaway about cities and what it really means for them to be sustainable. And here's the bottom line. You can't just make a city sustainable from the top down. You can design the most beautiful parks, plant a million trees, but if you don't understand the culture, the needs, and the everyday practices of the people living there, the whole plan is going to fall apart. Real sustainability happens in that messy space between the designer's blueprint and how people actually live their lives. So when you look at these beautiful, peaceful old photos at the city that was supposed to be, and you hold that image against the story of trampled lawns and chopped down trees, you can literally see the gap between the plan and the reality. It's a conflict that happened 100 years ago, but it feels incredibly familiar, doesn't it? Which really leaves us with a final question for today, for our own cities. We still design beautiful public spaces with very specific ideas about how they should be used. But people are always going to be unpredictable. They'll use them for protests, for parties, for survival. The challenge that Cherepovets faced, bridging that gap between the planner's vision and the public's reality, is one we are absolutely still trying to solve.